I was looking at the price comparisons in these notes for today, and it is honestly just staggering.
Oh, yeah, it really puts the whole concept of a barrier to entry into a completely new light.
Right. I mean, we talk about inflation today, but you have to imagine this. Before the mid 1400s, buying a single book, just one single volume, could cost you the equivalent of a working farm,
Or a vineyard, yeah.
a whole vineyard for one book.
We aren't just talking about knowledge being expensive here. We were talking about it being an exclusive asset class.
Yeah.
It was like owning a private jet today.
Exactly. And if you didn't have that kind of capital, that kind of immense wealth, knowledge was quite literally locked away.
Chained up.
Yeah, I don't mean behind a digital paywall.
Uh-huh.
I mean physically chained to a heavy wooden desk in a monastery.
Which is such a wild visual to start with.
It really is. But today we are unpacking the exact moment that that specific asset class crashed. And I mean crashed in the best way possible.
The absolute best way.
Welcome to the deep dive. Today, we are digging into the AP European History source materials, focusing on the invention of the printing press. And our mission here is pretty specific. We want to figure out how a modified wine press didn't just, print books, but actually rewrote the source code for modern Europe.
I think that is a great way to frame it, because usually when we look at history, we talk about kings, right? We talk about wars, shifting borders, things like that.
Right, the usual suspect.
Exactly. But the Gutenberg Revolution is fundamentally different. This is a story about infrastructure.
The plumbing of ideas?
The plumbing of ideas, yes. When you change how information moves, you fundamentally change how people think.
And it happens so fast. That is the thing that really jumped out at me from the source stack. We go from monks hand-copying texts in total silence to a continent just flooded with pamphlets in practically a single lifetime.
It's an explosion.
It really feels like the only comparable thing in our lifetime is the sudden rise of the internet.
That's the perfect parallel. It is the shift from elite access to public participation. But to really grasp that, we have to look at the bottleneck that existed before the 1450s. You have to appreciate the before to understand the after.
Let's start right there then, the manuscript era. The sources paint a picture that is, honestly, it sounds incredibly frustrating.
Oh, was?
If I'm a scholar in, say, the year 1400, and I want a copy of Aristotle, what is my actual day-to-day reality?
Well, your reality is waiting. A lot of waiting.
Yeah.
And paying a lot of money.
Yeah.
You are relying entirely on a scribe, most likely sitting in a cold monastery somewhere, to physically copy that text.
Letter by letter.
Letter by letter, onto parchment. It's painstakingly slow. But the bigger issue, and the source materials really emphasize this part, is the corruption of the data.
This is that telephone game concept we were talking about earlier, right?
Exactly. Because these scribes were human, they were essentially introducing noise into the signal every single time they copied a text.
Right. I read that they would skip a line or misread a word because the handwriting of the guy before them was bad.
Or sometimes they would even correct something. They'd see a sentence, think it was wrong, and change it. But they were actually making it wrong.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, and then the next scribe comes along, copies those new mistakes, and adds their own on top of it.
So by the time you actually get your expensive book, you aren't just getting the knowledge. You are getting a massive degradation of the original signal.
Precisely. Knowledge was incredibly local, it was fragile, and it was totally inconsistent.
Which honestly makes any kind of scientific progress impossible. You can't build on a foundation if the foundation keeps shifting under your feet.
You really can't.
I mean, think about it. If my copy of a medical text says treat a fever with heat, and your copy says treat it with ice because of a scribe's typo, we have a serious, life-threatening problem.
You cannot do science without reliable data. And that right there is where Johannes Gutenberg enters the picture in Mainz, Germany, right around the 1450s.
Now, the sources make a distinction here that I think is really crucial for us to point out. Gutenberg didn't just invent printing in a total vacuum.
Right, he wasn't the first to print things.
Woodblock printing already existed. East Asia had been doing it for centuries, but Gutenberg's specific background was as goldsmith. How did that specific skill set actually change the game?
That is the key technical insight of this whole era. Because he was a goldsmith, he deeply understood how to work with metal alloys and molds. He didn't just carve an entire page out of a block of wood.
Which is a one-and-done thing, right? Wood wears out quickly.
It wears out, and you can only use it for that one specific page. Instead, Gutenberg created movable type. He cast individual metal letters. So he had a separate, durable piece of metal for every single A, E, and Z.
So it is a kit of parts. It's literally like Lego bricks for language.
That is a perfect analogy. It's
Yeah.
totally modular. You arrange the metal letters to form a page, you ink it, you press it, and then this is where the magic happens. You take that page apart and use those exact same letters to build the next page.
It turned book production from this unique artisanal craft into an industrial assembly line. But there is a hidden variable here. The notes mention that the press itself gets all the glory in history class, but the economics of it wouldn't have worked without a specific material change.
Oh, this is vital.
We have to talk about paper, because if Gutenberg was printing on what they used before, he would have gone bankrupt in a week.
Paper is the unsung hero of the Gutenberg Revolution. You can have the fastest printing press in the entire world, but if you are printing on parchment, you have a massive supply chain problem.
Because parchment is treated animal skin.
Yes.
I read in the stack that a single Gutenberg Bible required the skins of something like 300 sheep.
It is an absurd amount of livestock.
Yeah.
Just imagine the cost of that. It is completely unscalable. You cannot mass produce information if your raw material requires vast grazing lands and literal shepherds.
Right.
But paper-making technology, which actually traveled to Europe from China, completely changed the math. Paper is made from rags. It's made from pulp. It is abundant, and it is cheap.
So you have this amazing convergence of two technologies at the exact same time. The high-speed output of the metal press and the low-cost input of paper.
That convergence is the catalyst. And the result is an absolute explosion. The numbers in the historical documents are just wild.
Let's hear them.
Okay, so in 1450, you have 0 printing presses in Europe. By 1500, which is just 50 years later, there are nearly 1,000 presses operating in roughly 200 different cities.
And they produced about 40,000 different titles.
Yes.
That means we went from a world where a town library might have 20 books to a world with millions of individual copies in circulation. That is essentially going from dial-up internet to fiber optic cable in a single generation.
It is the very first time in human history that we see mass media. And that changes the fundamental behavior of the consumer.
So we have the hardware sorted out, we have the network, but the really juicy part of this deep dive is the software, the ideas themselves. The sources link the printing press directly to the Renaissance.
They do, very strongly.
We usually think of the Renaissance as painters and sculptors, Michelangelo and Da Vinci, but the printing press seems to be the engine that actually pushed these intellectual ideas out of Italy and into the rest of Europe.
Right. The Renaissance was essentially an intellectual movement. It was a massive revival of classical Greek and Roman learning. But without the press, it really might have just stayed a localized Italian phenomenon.
The comparison the text makes here is fascinating. They compare Petrarch to Erasmus. It is like a perfect A/B test of the technology.
It really is.
Petrarch is in the 14th century, which is preprint. Erasmus is in the 16th century, postprint. What does that difference look like in practice?
It is the difference between having a private conversation in your living room and doing a global broadcast. Petrarch is often called the father of humanism. He was brilliant. But he is mostly writing letters to his friends and a small network of scholars.
Right, because his words had to be hand-copied.
Exactly. His influence was incredibly deep, but it was very narrow. Physically moving his words across borders was just too hard. You had to know someone who knew someone to get a copy of Petrarch.
And then you have Erasmus in the 16th century.
And Erasmus becomes the first true public intellectual. He is a superstar. He writes something, and within weeks, thousands of identical copies are being read simultaneously in London, Paris, Mainz, and Rome.
He could actually shape public opinion across an entire continent.
Because the distribution mechanism finally existed to allow that.
That word you just used, identical, keeps coming up in the AP materials. The sources call it standardized debate. This ties right back to the error correction issue we were talking about with the monks.
Yes, it is the bedrock of modern research.
Right.
For the first time ever, if I am a scholar in London and you are a scholar in Venice, and we are both citing page 42 of a specific scientific treatise, we are looking at the exact same data.
We aren't arguing about a scribe's messy handwriting.
Or a missing paragraph, no. We are actually arguing about the idea itself.
It is essentially the introduction of version control for human knowledge. Before this, everyone was basically working off a different rough draft.
That is a brilliant way to put it. It stabilized the data set. Scholars could finally stop correcting the mistakes of the past and start building the future. The Republic of Letters, this virtual community of European scholars, was built entirely on that stability. You cannot have a shared community if you aren't reading the exact same text.
But it wasn't just wealthy scholars reading Latin in ivory towers, right? The printing press had bills to pay. This brings us to the commercial side of things and how capitalism actually changed the very languages we speak today.
This is one of my absolute favorite unintended consequences in all of history.
It blew my mind because I had never connected the dots between making money and grammar.
Printers are capitalists. They invested heavily in their presses, and they want to sell units. The market for Latin books is basically just the clergy, the ultra-rich. That is a very small demographic. If you want to scale your business, you can't just sell to them.
If you want to scale, you have to sell to the merchants, the lawyers, the urban middle class, and they aren't speaking Latin at the dinner table. They are speaking the vernacular.
Exactly. They speak French, German, Italian, English. So printers started flooding the market with books printed in local languages because that is where the consumer demand was. But here's the major rub. Before the printing press, German wasn't just one standardized thing.
Right. The sources say it was highly fragmented.
It was 100 different regional dialects. Someone from one town might barely understand someone from a town 50 miles away.
So if I am a printer in Augsburg and I want to sell my new book to a merchant in Hamburg, I have a major compatibility problem.
You have a totally fragmented market.
Yeah.
So printers had to make a business choice. They couldn't afford to print a slightly different version of a book for every single village. They had to pick a specific dialect, standardize the spelling and the grammar, and say, okay, this is German or this is English.
They essentially codified human language for profit.
They absolutely did. And the sources point to some huge historical figures here. Martin Luther's translation of the Bible basically standardized High German. William Caxton and Chaucer helped stabilize and standardize English. Dante did it for Italian. By printing massive volumes of these specific works, they essentially froze the language in time.
And the ripple effect of that is just massive. Once everyone across a large region is reading the exact same version of German, they start to feel like they belong to a shared group. It creates this psychological border.
It is the birth of national identity. The historian Benedict Anderson calls it imagined communities. You will never actually meet most of the people in your nation, but because you read the same news and the same books in the exact same mother tongue, you feel a bond with them.
You feel like there is an us.
Yes. And that naturally distinguishes you from them across the border who are reading in French.
So you really can't have modern nationalism without the printing press fixing those languages in place first. It is incredible to think that national borders were essentially hardened by printer's ink.
It solidified the entire cultural map of Europe. But if we are talking about lines being drawn, we have to talk about the biggest fracture of them all. Segment 4 in our source stack. The religious upheaval.
The Reformation. Now, I grew up learning about this strictly as a religious event, a theological debate. But reading these sources, it really feels like a tech story.
The materials are very clear on this point. This wasn't just a theological dispute about grace and sin. It was a media war. It was the very first time a dissident group used mass media to completely bypass a central authority.
Because before the press, the Catholic Church held a strict monopoly. And it wasn't just a monopoly on political power, it was a monopoly on truth.
Absolutely. Think about the user experience of an average Christian in the year 1500. The Bible was only available in Latin. The church liturgy was in Latin. Most ordinary people couldn't read at all. And even if they could, they certainly didn't know Latin.
So if you wanted to know the will of God, you had to go through the institution.
You had to ask the priest to interpret it for you.
The church was the ultimate gatekeeper. They controlled the single access point to salvation.
And the printing press bypassed the gate completely. When Luther and other reformers started translating the Bible into the vernacular and printing it by the thousands, they basically gave the source code of the religion directly to the end user.
That concept of direct access is revolutionary. Suddenly, a merchant's wife in a small German town can read the text herself and say, hey, wait a minute. I don't see anything in this book about paying the priest for forgiveness.
It invited critical engagement for the first time. It turned passive believers into active participants. It empowered people to question centuries of authority because they could literally point to the printed text themselves. And we really have to look at Martin Luther as a master of this new media landscape.
We all know the famous story of him posting the 95 Theses on the church door in Wittenberg in 1517.
But in the old manuscript world, that is just a local memo.
Right.
It stays on that church door. It is basically a faculty meeting agenda for local monks.
But the printers saw controversy. And controversy sells books.
Exactly. They took those theses, translated them from academic Latin into everyday German, printed them, and they went viral. We are talking about a speed of diffusion that the church hierarchy literally couldn't comprehend.
They were playing slow institutional defense against a viral meme.
Luther actually called printing God's highest act of grace. He fully understood that the press was the only weapon capable of breaking the church's institutional monopoly. The Reformation was a theological event, yes, but it was driven entirely by a media revolution. Without the printing press, Luther's probably just another heretic burned at the stake.
But with the press, he splits the continent of Europe in half.
Precisely.
It really brings this entire deep dive together. You look at the stack of AP Euro sources and you see this consistent, undeniable theme. The press breaks monopolies.
Every single time.
It broke the monopoly on scarce books. It broke the monopoly on elite academic knowledge. It broke the monopoly of the church.
And in doing all of that, it restructured the foundations of society. It is not just that people simply had more books on their shelves. It is that the fundamental hierarchy of authority changed. Power shifted away from those who hoarded the information to those who could spread it and interpret it rapidly.
So let's try to synthesize all of this for you listening, because we have covered a massive amount of historical ground today. We start with the tech shift. Movable metal type and cheap paper converging to create the ability to scale information.
Which then leads directly to the intellectual explosion. Standardized data and identical copies fueling the Renaissance and laying the groundwork for the scientific revolution.
Then we have the cultural shift. Vernacular print creating standardized languages, which in turn creates the first modern national identities.
And finally, the religious upheaval. The democratization of Scripture directly leading to the Protestant Reformation.
It is the complete architecture of the modern world. And the biggest takeaway for me from all these sources isn't just about what happened in the past. It is the precedent it sets for us today. The Gutenberg Revolution proves that when you dramatically change the cost and the speed of information, you don't just get faster information, you get a different kind of human society.
It changes the civic operating system. It creates a public sphere where ideas can be debated openly, for better or worse. And we do have to be honest here. The sources show it created chaos, brutal wars, and confusion for over 100 years. It was not a peaceful transition.
No, not at all.
But it also created the necessary path forward to modern democracy and modern science.
And that leads us to the final thought we want to leave you with today. The printing press disrupted the monopoly on truth in the 1500s. It made information cheap, abundant, and completely impossible to contain.
It took power from the few and it gave it to the many. But as we said, it was messy.
Very messy. So look at where we are sitting today. We are living through a technological shift that arguably dwarfs Gutenberg. We have an internet where information is instant, free, and infinite.
Right.
If the printing press broke the monopoly of the church and the king, what entrenched structures are breaking down right now?
And consider the flip side of that. Gutenberg standardized knowledge. He got everyone in Europe onto the same page, literally and figuratively. Today, are we seeing a new standardization of global knowledge? Or is this new technology actually fracturing us back into little isolated hyperlocal tribes?
Are we building a new digital republic of letters, or are we just playing a much faster, much louder game of telephone? That is definitely something for you to think about the next time you scroll through your social media feed.
The technology changes, but the humans struggle to control the narrative. That stays exactly the same.
Thanks for diving into the sources with us today. We will see you on the next deep dive.